lower bracket really at any point, but the earlier it happens, the worse it is for the rest of the bracket for you. Of course, it's better than just losing and instantly being out of the tournament. So both of these teams happy that it exists and happy to be here, but it is by no means going to be even clean sailing, even for whoever does win this game. They're going to have the toughest road still to those grand finals if that is their where they're going to end up.
Most definitely. The teams are ready to roll, as does Gargoyle Stream and Obey Alliance are set to square off right now in Sanguine Depths.
Alrighty, so now it's going to be important to see what the first pull of the dungeon looks like for both of these sides. I think that whenever we watch Sanguine Depths, the first pull has dictated a lot of the Sanguine healing across the whole entire dungeon, and it's dictated like how you're going to be able to use that Venthyr Covenant buff just throughout the whole entire dungeon. It's really difficult to have something like an on-death effects like Sanguine, while also making use of the lanterns, trying to stack all the mobs on top of the lanterns, and then just like not healing them after the fact. Especially since the meta pull has also been, like you see from Obey Alliance, they're immediately tagging that Brute. They're pulling the Brute all the way back. That Brute is really difficult to move, as he can't be displaced by any ability. And so it's incredibly important to have perfect Sanguine management here. Now you do see Maystein there on that Venthyr Death Knight, opening up that cage there on the side of Obey Alliance. Their DK also the Venthyr.
Yeah, getting access to this lantern is crucially important here, and it adds an extra level of difficulty given that Sanguine is going on here and given that Quaking is going on here. They have so much difficulty in managing this small space that they're in, while preventing Sanguine healing, while avoiding Quaking anybody, while dodging those frontals from the Mistcaller, and while making sure that everything is still dying within range of that lantern to get that damage and healing buff there. And you can see both teams have done a fairly good job of handling that. In fact, Gargoyle are just running on and finishing off the last enemies in that pull while running forward. Obey Alliance also getting started here on their next pull of the dungeon. Both teams here with a similar plan as they're moving towards the first boss.
All right, so just a little bit of stats for this, some drat stats. Whenever you're looking at the time trials for this dungeon, Gargoyle are favored by approximately 30 seconds for Sanguine Depths, just relative to what they were doing during time trials. So that's something that is important to note. Now you do see Gargoyle pulling this Brute with all of these ticks and all of these mobs that engorge and explode whenever they die. Ooh, really good Shining Force to knock those mobs back. And now they use a Ring of Peace to knock them forward. The Brute is doing his charge straight out of the Sanguine. Great job of being able to mitigate as much Sanguine healing as possible. But Obey Alliance was able to keep the pack stacked up just a little bit more, able to get a more efficient cleave, and they have the Pride spawning just a hair ahead, Dratnos.
Yeah, both of these teams, though, with that Pride showing up right about at the same time. You can also see there's one extra tick that's been left. It's standing there, consuming one of those corpses on the side of Gargoyle. Whereas on the side of Obey Alliance, they have that extra percentage point on their scoreboard right now. So slight advantages in favor of Obey Alliance, I'd say, right now. The one extra mob shouldn't matter too much because it'll just get pulled into the very next pull. But the fact that this Pride is dying sooner is the really big piece of news here for Obey Alliance. That Touch of Death is going to come out to finish it. They're going to grab one of the smaller ticks that's still in the air, and they will be taking the rest of this in to the first boss. About 5 seconds ahead of where Gargoyle is. Lust is coming out for both teams. And that is going to be a big damage. We'll see which team is able to deploy more damage on this boss, while also making sure it does not get even a single Sanguine healing tick.
One tick of Sanguine healing is an impressive amount of damage whenever you have high health targets such as bosses, because it is percentage-based healing. The Brutes are also notoriously difficult to move. It looked like one of the Brutes was like kind of bathing in the Sanguine there in the back. So you see the Brute on the side that does Gargoyle's stream just had a little bit extra health. And because it had just a little bit extra health, you do see Obey Alliance starting to gap about a 10% boss HP lead, coming in a little bit early here in this race.
Yeah, they pulled the boss a little sooner, and it looks like they're going to kill the boss a little sooner unless a sudden burst of damage comes out in favor of Gargoyle. You can see both teams are going to be kiting this last set of orbs. They do not want to bother with the damage of soaking it. Looks like Hollow actually is going to intercept one of them, given that the boss is now rooted and casting that Juggernaut Rush. And they are going to be able to stop all of those orbs from connecting. And actually, Gargoyle has really caught up here. It dies on the side of Obey Alliance, and then less than 5 seconds later, it's a 4-second split on boss 1 for these two teams. Exactly identical in terms of mob count, and they are both going to send their tanks forward to go and grab some more of the trash. I expect that we'll see pretty similar sets of enemies here.
It's the EU damage difference right there, coming in hot. The Chamber Sentinel has been pulled on the side of Does Gargoyle stream. For the side of Obey Alliance, exactly the same pull. We didn't see this Chamber Sentinel pulled on previous MDI weekend with this pack, but that was also largely due to the fact that it was also inspiring, so you wouldn't be able to kick his Stone Skin ability. The Severing Slice, which is the ability that you see the Chamber Sentinels casting on both sides, has also been nerfed pretty heavily. I think it's like reduced by 50% health, or 50% damage, right, Dratnos? So pretty massive amounts of damage that's going to be reduced on the tank. Now the Chamber Sentinels are going to be kited out of the Sanguine area, and it's starting to look like Gargoyle is catching up with just slightly better Sanguine management across their packs.
Yeah, Gargoyle speeding up here. One thing to note as well, you can see on the side of Obey Alliance, Skylark has proc Last Resort, whereas on the side of Gargoyle, Last Resort is still available for IQ. So that is going to be an important defensive difference that could easily explain if something goes wrong for Obey Alliance, what the difference was. As Gargoyle getting started on their next pull, certainly ahead of where Obey Alliance are. Obey Alliance going to send Skylark forward to go and grab some mobs. Gargoyle have line of sighted around a little corner there, and it's exactly what Obey Alliance is up to as well. So these two teams have had pretty identical strategies for the dungeon so far, with only the most minor of differences and very minor execution differences as well. But
yeah,
this is still anybody's game.
So the reason that they're going to be line of sighting and like making sure that they stay out of combat is because of those Grand Overseers. The Grand Overseers put a debuff onto targets that make you do less damage and do less healing. So making sure that they stay out of combat while IQ and while Skylark on their respective teams are grabbing the mobs and grouping them up is really important, because that's effectively like 4 stacks of that 20% reduced damage dealt that you just can't get back, right? It's just not worth even getting into combat, because you're waiting for the tank to group up the pack anyways.
So Obey Alliance here have actually managed to spawn their Pride ahead of where Gargoyle are by a pretty sizable amount. Both teams have an Oppressor crowd controlled, I believe, because they're both at the same trash count. So they will be dealing with those Oppressors at some point in the future, or skipping them. But this Pride, this Pride is at basically the same health here. It's very difficult to separate these two teams.
Yeah, definitely neck and neck here. So now both of the Prides are going to be downed at virtually the exact same time. And now the next pull is where I think we've seen a decent amount of variation coming in from a lot of teams across the weekend. What they're going to pull into this Lantern is pretty important. You do see that Mind Soothe coming in on that Chamber Sentinel. That way Maystein, for the side of Does Gargoyle stream, can click on the Lantern. And then, like you see from Obey Alliance, they're all going to run into the room and now kill the mobs on top of where the Lantern buff's radius is. You can actually kill it through the wall and be able to get that Lantern Covenant-specific Venthyr buff coming into the group. Obey Alliance drops Ring of Peace. At the exact same time, Gargoyle drops Ring of Peace, making sure they're trying to get all the mobs out. Sanguine healing on both sides, though. Now the mobs are in the corner, being just bathing in that Sanguine. That's so bad for both sides. Get that Overseer out of there. Grip him. Grab him. Stop that.
Okay, so Obey Alliance has slightly less Sanguine difficulties than Gargoyle, although still some Sanguine healing coming out for them. They are going to be a couple seconds ahead here, something like 15 seconds in their favor as a result of the extra Sanguine damage dealt to Gargoyle. Mind Soothe is going to be used to facilitate the skip here of the mini-boss in this room. Very useful ability that has been seeing a lot of valuable play from all the priests in this tournament, as both teams will now be moving into this ring area. This area is a crucially important one, because what you want to try and do is chain the buff from one Lantern into the next Lantern. If you can do that, then you can make that next Lantern refresh, say, a 9-stack into a 10-stack, or a 4-stack into a 5-stack, rather than just getting a 1-stack, and effectively doubles the value of this first Lantern that you've clicked, if you're able to make it to that second Lantern and have something die within its radius before your first buff has fallen off.
It's so hard to have that consistent on Sanguine, though, from how it looks. But Obey Alliance, you see that Scribe? He's perfectly inside, like on top of the Lantern, while being inside like 4 Sanguine puddles. That was actually great news. The Pride spawning at the exact same time for both sides. Obey Alliance and Gargoyle. This is a neck and neck race, Stratnos.
These Prides are just melting as a result of that massive Venthyr buff, melting more for Gargoyle than for Obey Alliance. That Pride is just disappeared from existence, as it appears that Mick has just ascended on that Windwalker Monk. Not bad on the side of Obey Alliance damage either, but Gargoyle really sneaking ahead there. So they are now going to be moving towards the next lantern. Only a couple seconds left on their buff, and I'm not sure if they'll be able to get the extension here. We'll see.
All right. They do, of course, have a 60-second time, like 60 seconds to be able to get the extension. So you're going to just click it instantly. You saw 40 and Macestein just trying to click that instantly. They're going to, like, as soon as you get one mob down, then you're able to refresh that buff. So it's not based on whenever the lantern is timed out. It's based on whenever the first mob dies is whenever you're going to be getting that refresh. Not all the mobs actually give the damage buff in this area. I think it's the very
smallest ones don't, which is, of course, one of the tricky things, given that they would be the easiest to kill.
The vestiges, vestiges don't, I don't think.
Mode goes down on the side of Gargoyle. It looks like in maybe that puddle spawned by the Doubt manifestation. They are going to get the battle res on him. They do have actually a second battle res available as well if something else were to go wrong. But those 5 seconds, given how close this game has been so far, could easily make the difference. The two teams have been trading back and forth. Who's been in the lead on every given pull? They've been mirroring each other, pull for pull, pretty much up to this point. Gargoyle a little bit ahead still in terms of dungeon progression, but those 5 seconds will be assessed against them at the end, and that could certainly matter.
Where do you think the 2% enemy forces differential came from, Dratnos?
I think that they've pulled slightly differently in this area. I think they've pulled slightly different.
There was some mob that was in a cage, probably.
Yeah, there's some. They're going to end up with the same set of mobs pulled here on the left, but doing it with slightly different percentages at slightly different times between the two teams. And it looks like Gargoyle are still going to be getting done with their pulls faster. Obey Alliance had, I think, a bigger pull going on there, but now they have these two Scribes by themselves that they do need to finish off. Scribes also, one of them is at a lot higher health there. Maybe there was a Sanguine issue, perhaps, that caused that, because, of course, Scribes are difficult to move. Good death grip is going to come out from 40 on that, but as you can see, Gargoyle are getting underway with Executor Tarvold. This is a very, very tricky boss, even on fortified tunnels.
Yeah, exactly. And the tricky part of it comes with the adds overlap with the Castigate. You see it coming out right here, the Castigate, a lot of damage into Mick, and now Obey Alliance has pulled Tarvold themselves. The second add that spawned overlaps with the Castigation, so that's the first major pain point. The second major pain point is, I think, the 5th Castigation. I think that overlaps with another ad as well. So those two parts are like, oh my goodness, I need to pop something. You see Krona gets targeted, good block. That's actually just perfect for that's what you're saving block for, basically. You're saving it for that moment where the ad is out, Castigation is on you, and you're like, all right, now I'm pressing my ice block here. Alternatively, you can feign death every single one. If you did play Hunter, neither team electing to play Hunter in this dungeon, they've determined that the utility from the DK, too important. The utility of Hunter, not that great.
Melds were actually used in a synchronized way by Gargoyle a little while ago during the trash section, whereas Obey Alliance found a way to do that area without committing their melds, and so they're actually able to meld when targeted by Overseer Tarvold, whereas Gargoyle does not have that option, and they need to rely on those class abilities instead. So far, they've been doing a pretty good job of having that. You can see Macestein targeted, runs off to the side, is going to use Anti-Magic Shell to survive that brutal dot, but there it is. Tarvold going down with about 30% left on the side of Obey Alliance. So Gargoyle ahead here, once you factor in those 5 seconds, probably by something like 30 seconds, I would say.
Yeah, and I do think part of it is just like you said, what they pulled in this ring. They pulled a little bit differently in terms of their trash, but it allowed them to just catch up in terms of their time in the dungeon. Now you see Mr. Mode of Fae running with his Night Fae Covenant, with his Wrathlings, and now they've pulled the third boss of the instance. With all of the trash, there is, of course, a couple of ads CC'd off to the side. This is important because they don't want to proc their 80% pride. If they proc their 80% pride during the boss, I would describe that as unhealable amounts of damage, especially with the rights of supremacy like that.
Look at the way that they are controlling these mobs as they're dying as well. We saw a Sigil of Chains into a Ring of Peace, into a Death Grip, to make sure that all 4 of these mobs, even though they were dying at different times, died in different places as well to prevent Sanguine healing being a problem. And really, really good play actually there by Gargoyle.
As a resident tank player, how do you feel about quickening Sigil versus Sigil of Chains in most MDI-style dungeons?
Right, so Sigil of Chains is that option that we saw coming in big use there. It is very potent against effects like Sanguine, just that extra little piece of control to grip mobs that are sometimes archers or casters that can be difficult to move without access to some kind of displacement effect. It is this expansion a damage loss, though, to not have access to the shorter cooldown on your Kyrian Covenant ability, the Elysian Decree, which counts as a sigil and therefore benefits from the cooldown reduction from quickened sigils. And so that is definitely something that you have to make that decision, I think, on a dungeon-by-dungeon basis. Anytime your Sigil of Chains is seeing substantial use, which I think it has in this dungeon, it does appear to be. I think it's got to be worth that slight damage loss.
I mean, definitely in Sanguine, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in other dungeons though, the increased damage is often going to be more valuable.
Sure, definitely also makes sense in that regard. All right, so now Gargoyle and Obey Alliance both sitting at 79%, both of them having a Vestige. Paralysis off to the side, right? So Gargoyle about 15.
Oh no!
Oh no! The para! No repair!
So yeah, Mode got autoed by that Vestige there. Is going to get the battle res, but they don't have any more hard CCs available for this thing, so it is just going to come in at the end of this boss fight, which means that it's going to be dropping those puddles. And that boss is going to teleport back to the middle of the room very shortly. Okay, luckily there is no void zone underneath the very middle of the room, so they are able to finish it off, and they will be killing this Vestige. But when the boss died, Obey Alliance had theirs under 15% HP. Plus, Obey Alliance has the benefit of 2 battle reses and 10 seconds on the timer from those deaths that will be assessed at the end there, as they, in a much more controlled fashion, are bringing that Vestige in at the end of their boss. So yeah, this is brutal.
But notably, okay, so there's a 10-second depth differential, but if you look at their splits, they were approximately 25 seconds behind. So, I mean, it's going to come down to how General Call goes. Is Obey Alliance going to be able to get their invisibility potions off on this Pride? Because if they have to play the Pride, then that's probably going to lose it for them as well. So making sure that they do this cleanly is really important. And honestly, right now, they need to make sure that the Sanguine management on both sides is perfect. Because any mistake, any minor Sanguine healing could cost either team the whole entire game. The game is definitely favored for Gargoyle, but I would say it's a 52-48 kind of favor, not a massive favorite.
Oh no, and there's a Mist Dancer that is Sanguine healing there for Gargoyle. That is going to add some time. If Obey Alliance are able to make this pull happen without something similar going on, then they could be in pretty good shape here. They have used Mind Suit there on that Overseer to keep it from getting involved in this pull. It is not actually linked to the mobs that are next to it, which means that you can avoid pulling it if you are careful and don't aggro it with another way, or as long as you tag the mob on the far right, you can avoid pulling that mob on the far left, basically, is the way that one works. Gargoyle are going to finish off their pull, but Obey Alliance have caught up here in a big way.
Todd! Big Todd! All right, now you see the Mind Suit coming in hot. Now everybody hug the right wall. Don't aggro that Overseer. That Overseer sucks. All right, now everybody's making their way through. General Call is going to be pulled at virtually identical times for both of these teams, Stratnos.
Yeah, I mean, basically the entire 10-second differential here is what separates these two teams. So with that 10 seconds factored in, they're at the exact same place and the exact same time in the dungeon. All that remains is who can do this gauntlet better and who can execute the last boss better. A lot is going to come down to the first couple mobs here, as they do drop Sanguine. There are mobs in this area that do drop Sanguine, and which need to be managed carefully. So you can see Skylark is going to pop his meta and run away here, carefully leaving a trail of Sanguine. Very important to avoid having that heal General Call, because General Call has such a large health total, given the... Oh no, Skylark is going to proc Last Resort here. So that is one fewer defensive option that he's going to have available for the remainder of this. Does get to use the shield here against the Gloom Squall, but... Ooh, that was sketchy. There's a sketchy sequence of events on the side of Obey Alliance. Meanwhile, Gargoyle already making their way up further into the run.
Okay, so notably too, only the cadets drop Sanguine. It looks like General Call... Okay, so General Call needs to be DPS down to 90% HP. It looks like Obey Alliance is... Okay, so now they were actually doing a good job of trying to move and position themselves a little bit quicker. Does Gargoyle stream? Doubling up. A pretty standard pull here. But they need to make sure that their Sanguine management is perfect here. Both teams do. So they're
these ones, I think, don't drop the Sanguine, right? The Acolytes don't. So I think that this is a lot...
The cadets do, but they're pulling
the cadets
into the pack. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So they've got some cadets in here, right. Those need to be carefully managed as they're dying. You can see, ooh, beautiful Ring of Peace comes out from Obey Alliance. Also beautiful priority damage coming in on those mobs. And on the side of Gargoyle, things are also looking good here. So again, we'll be able to see how far apart these two teams are based on when General Call does go immune and run up to the next part of the gauntlet. That's at 80% health. and we can start counting.
Oh!
Actually, it's Obey Alliance to
Obey
get it done
Alliance!
first. So Obey Alliance have surged into the lead here, not only ahead in terms of dungeon progression at this time, they also have those 10 seconds in their favor. So combining those two things, they are about 15 seconds in the lead here. By no means...
OCE diff!
Oh, Skylark, though, drops very low. Is going to use Fell Devastation to pop into meta for a couple seconds, but he does not have either his actual meta button available or his Last Resort available. So if things go slightly wrong here, you could be looking at a dead tank on the side of Obey Alliance. This is a high tank damage moment of the dungeon. They need to be really, really careful here, as both teams are pretty tapped on healer mana.
Look at, mode is like literally 0 mana. Polo is at like 15 or 20%. So while there is actually a pretty considerable amount of mana regen coming from both of them playing Night Fae, this is really scary for mode. And because he's super tapped on mana, he can no longer do as much damage as he would like to do. No, 2 deaths! There's no battle reses! This is so bad for Gargoyle, Dratnos! Oh no!
Mick goes down as well, and they're going to try and finish off Call. They need to get Call to 70%. I don't actually know how close they are on that. But they
IQ is starting to die.
Yeah, so IQ procs that Last Resort, which he did still have available. Oh, no. He's going to run away. Okay, so here's the plan. We're going to run away and keep kiting until the rest of the team is able to make it back. But that is so costly here.
Potions in the way. On the way.
Yeah, this has got to be Obey Alliance's chance now. Obey Alliance not having something of the same size go wrong. IQ barely able to keep the remaining members of the group alive using that shield against the Gloom Squall. But yeah, you can see Obey Alliance are going to get started on their Manifestation of Pride. They are now way ahead. This dungeon has been neck and neck up to this point, but this has been catastrophic last minute here for Gargoyle.
That was an absolutely horrible series of events. What actually ended up killing them? Did you see? Was it the Sentinel's AoE?
I think it was there was an overlap there between the boss AoE and the Sentinel craggy fracture thing. So they needed to both stack in a largish circle.
Their Bloodlust just got lost on Gargoyle.
Yeah.
They popped Bloodlust to try to kill the Pride. Now they're full wipe. Oh, Gargoyle, no!
This is catastrophic for Gargoyle. They're now in a position where, because that Pride is still in the way and because that Lust is unavailable, Obey Alliance are in great shape.
I have terrible news for Gargoyle.
What is that terrible news?
The Pride looks like it was still aggro.
Okay, so that they're gonna have to finish off that Pride, it seems. I mean,
at 20%.
That is going to be what happens for them. It is going to run all the way at them. So they're going to have to kill this Pride, and it's all over at this point for Gargoyle. The only way that they could come back here is if Obey Alliance have something truly monumentally bad happen on General Call here. But you can see they already have General Call at 55%. That fight ends when she reaches 50% HP. So they are 75% of the way through the boss fight portion of this boss. They are at 100% mob count. Both teams have had clean runs throughout this dungeon up until this final gauntlet where, as you say, it really all fell apart for Gargoyle.
Yep. All right, so Obey Alliance does kill General Call at 50% HP here, so they only have 1% left on the boss. Not too much else happening, as they do get the boss to 50% HP and take the first map and take a lead in the series 1-0.
That's right, Obey Alliance just cruising through Sanguine Depths about as well as they could, as well as you could for a Sanguine Depths run. And unfortunately, the Gargoyle stream just absolutely, just the gauntlet. It seems like almost all the time when you get into these dungeons in Sanguine Depths, you start going through, you make it through the first couple bosses and stuff, Dratnos, and then you feel all confident, and then the gauntlet just takes everything away from you.
Yeah. The gauntlet is a really, really, really tricky part of this dungeon, Dratnos. That's a good point, other Dratnos. Slightly less zoomed in Dratnos. Really, a lot of runs do fall apart there. That's, particularly when mana issues happen, when your healer is low on mana. And then, zoomed in Dratnos, another problem that happens is you have that overlap of the Gloom Squall and the Rupture from the Gargoyle Sentinel. So when those two things happen at the same time, that can be a really, really tricky thing to deal with.
Thank you very much, Dratnos, but closer. And Denos, you're pointing out the mana situation going into it for both of those healers, just how much it stresses them, even when they're Covenant, like you're saying, Fey Guardians will give them some kind of mana regen, but just not enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's just problematic because so General Calls he does like this Garrote style ability where he teleports behind you, right? And whenever he teleports behind you, he actually puts a bleed on the targets wherever he lands, not wherever he teleports from. And this is pretty problematic in like a double melee comp setup. So for both healers, they have like a Windwalker Monk and an Unholy DK. So they're going to be stacked up next to the Vengeance Demon Hunter. And if they're getting like 2, 3, even potentially 4 stacks of the bleed every single time General Call does his Garrote style ability, that actually will end up costing you a significant amount of mana. On top of that, I mean, Disc Priest has to spend a lot typically whenever they heal tanks a considerable amount. So that's also something that could come into effect. But I mean, mode started getting tapped. The Sentinel with the Gloom Squall overlap seemed like just a little bit too much, and it pushed them over the edge.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of times just the extra bleeds, I think, is probably one of the biggest things you touched on there, when it just gets so stressful to try to deal with everybody's bleeds before you're able to actually remove it through using your little Naru pet to be able to help out. It just exhausts them so much, and it feels like going slow and steady and nice and cleanly, well, you would think it'd be like nice and clean if you just go slow and steady throughout that gauntlet in a lot of cases, Dratnos, but I feel like some of the best runs and most consistent ones we had with like healers having a ton of mana is when they just have some super aggressive pulls to take advantage of those Venthyr Vials.
Yeah, in many ways, the best offense is a good defense there. The faster you can get through that segment, the bigger percentage of the time you're going to have access to that 50% damage and healing buff, and the less time you have to be casting spells and exhausting your mana, so definitely a time-sensitive area of the dungeon. As much as we talk about the mana, though, I don't think it was the mana that was the problem at the end there. I think it was just the one-shot that they had because of that overlap. Like, it's possible that they could have done other parts of that slightly better, but the main thing was just getting those two abilities to be lined up with each other. It's a really hard thing to avoid, but when it happens like that, it's a really, really, really difficult problem to solve.
They also have Quaking. Like, there's another issue of just having Quaking overlaps bad too. This dungeon with Quaking, with Sanguine, and then they decide to pull the Chamber Sentinel on top of it. I mean, the Chamber Sentinel's not like you don't typically pull the Chamber Sentinel with Call. You normally pull the Chamber Sentinel by itself, but in an MDI scenario, you need to make the most use of their time, and it is really, really rough to make sure that it goes well. And they show you right there how much practice the MDI does take, because just making sure that the timings are set up correctly is the most important thing.
Most definitely. And, Necrotic Wake is going to be our next dungeon as well, and that's going to be all about timings, all about the execution for this setup. And we really haven't seen Spiteful be too painful to deal with on this one, Dranos. What do you think about it?
Yeah, Spiteful is something that they can solve pretty effectively if everything is dying quickly from the weapons, from the rogues, with those 100% damage, with the orbs, with everything. So managing that effectively, and then you just need one ring apiece, one, running away, and you can handle the whole thing nice and cleanly. Despite that, I mean, it's one of those affixes where, like most on-death affixes, when it's done well, it's pretty invisible, but it is a pretty high pressure affix where if things go a little bit wrong with it, if it does start meleeing somebody, things can go very wrong very quickly from there. So even if it's not an affix we see cause problems, it is one that these teams have invested a significant amount of time and thought into countering.
Most definitely. And, I think the interesting thing is how well a lot of these teams already have the crowd control. They already have the resources sort of built in. It's an interesting factor, I think, of dungeon design or class design, even titles, when you're just like, oh, well, this class has the damage profile that we want. It also has the crowd control that we want. It's also flexible enough to have, side dispels that we want. It just kind of covers all of those bases. And we've only had a couple, like, dungeons, with Mr. Tyr and Desai coming to mind, where we've had, like, certain classes just be absolutely dominant in their, like, boomkins.
Yeah, exactly. But Necrotic Wake, on the other hand, definitely another one of those with the rogue, right? You get the Mark of the Masters. You get the Mark of the Master Assassin Legendary. Both teams are going to be playing rogue in this dungeon because Mark of the Master Assassin gives 100% crit for those Kyrian weapons. You can use it on the Anima Orbs. You can use it on the Javelins. You can use it on the Hammers if you really want to. And it just speeds up your dungeon progression by insurmountable amounts. It kind of reminds me of, if you guys remember Blackrock Hold, how that one got pretty polarized by Mage Spellsteal. It's kind of like that, except a little bit less silly. But it's still really good. And I mean, we saw Does Gargoyle Stream play Necrotic Wake earlier in the day. They didn't have the cleanest run, but making sure that they are able to shore up some of their weaknesses and come back. Like their run was very clean all the way through the necropolis, but they need a run that's clean all the way through the rest of the dungeon, and they need it now because otherwise they will get knocked out 2-0 versus Obey Alliance. But I do think that Does Gargoyle Stream should have the slight advantage coming into Necrotic Quake.
All right, well, let's see what both these teams have in store. As you mentioned, Does Gargoyle Stream is down 1 right now and facing elimination as the Necrotic Wake gets started.
Both teams were expecting to come right out the bat here with a massive pull, more than 20% trash onto the first boss. So be on the lookout for that right as soon as we get into game, because it's going to be massive amounts of trash onto the boss, and then the Pride with the boss as well at the same time. We've seen that pull work out really impressively for a couple teams. We've also seen it go very wrong in several different ways because it is extremely difficult to execute, but very rewarding if done right. A lot of the things in this dungeon as well is going to be the Rogue. Rogues have kind of this double job here, similar to last expansion. There's all this kind of rogue utility. You go and you do some shrouds, you go and you activate this first Goliath, but then also you have this massive job of unloading huge damage with the weapons at different points in the dungeon as well. So a lot of this is going to come down to the rogues, who are usually not main spec rogues, right? They play other specs in many other dungeons. So it's a really important test here. As we get underway, Gargoyle and Obey Alliance both going into the first boss, wasting no time here. Huge amounts of damage is going to be coming out.
Yeah, and pulling straight into Blightbone is something that is a pretty heavy MDI adaptation. You need to be super careful of the Spiteful Shades as they start spawning for both sides. Moving Blightbone away immediately. Get out of there. Unfortunately, you don't have access to things like Ring of Peace on the side of Obey Alliance. They're actually not running that Windwalker monk. Oh, that's an interesting adaptation. Skylar Proxys cheat. Please live.
Goes down for Obey Alliance.
Oh
no, they've spawned that manifestation of Pride. They're gonna get these animals. They do have a battle res available. 40 on that Death Knight does have the instant cast battle res. Shape is gonna wait to accept it.
Oh, Holodite.
Oh no! This is a full team wipe for Obey Alliance. There's no way that they can do this with a Rogue and a Demon Hunter. They are at least going to preserve that battle res, but the rest of the team is going down here. Blightbone is going to fully reset, but on the side of Gargoyle, things are also not going great. Mick going down, and they don't have an instant cast battle res. It's going to be Cheat That Death coming out from Maystein as well, who is going to land that battle res. The reason that he cheated there was because he was channeling that battle res, but it was worth, as they've gotten their full team back up. They are without a battle res, but they are going to be able to kill this boss without a full wipe. So they have taken a massive lead here. But wow, that was volatile.
Was it the Spitefuls? I didn't actually see what ended up killing Obey Alliance there. But now they just have to do the Manifestation of Pride by itself. I mean, this is a major time loss. This Gargoyle Stream is not having like a great time. Lightbone's getting kited around the room. Their killing power on him kind of started to dwindle a little bit as things started getting out of control, but they don't have a major blunder here. They're able to kind of recoup their losses in a slightly easier way, and now they are making their way towards the second part of this dungeon. Obey Alliance has re-engaged Blightbone. They're doing a good job of killing the Carrion Worms off. Where do you think it went wrong, Goodness? Do you think that the Windwalker monk with the Ring of Peace just being absent was probably something that happened there? Because Chompy is their Windwalker monk player, but he needed to be on Rogue for this dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible. It's not like Death Knight is bad or anything as well. Death Knight does do some pretty impressive damage, but Windwalker also does impressive damage and does bring that control with the Ring of Peace. Oh no, it looks like they've pulled this on the side of Gargoyle. We have some trash that was planned to be skipped, has regrettably been pulled here. They are going to do a U-turn here and just decide, okay, we'll just pull this. But that has cost Mode his life. Mode has released and will be running back, which means they are going to need to be very careful with their interrupts while they work on this pack, because these mobs have a lot of casts, and they don't have a healer available right now to help keep them alive through it. Everybody's going to have to use their defensives. Mode does arrive just in the nick of time, though, gets the penance off on Maystein, and they are going to survive that pull, but that is going to throw off their prideful calculations, assuming that was not in their pathing, which it seems like even if it was in their pathing, it was probably not supposed to come at that time. So we may see some adaptations and some further audibles called by Gargoyle here, as their run has certainly had quite a bit of stuff going wrong so far. Nothing on the scale of what's happened to Obey Alliance, though. Obey Alliance are going to be getting Blightbone down just about now, so this is a solid minute and a half slower than where Gargoyle were at this point.
IQ just procced his last resort there. All of these mobs looked like they weren't like getting grouped up that well whenever that anima orb got popped for the side of Does Gargoyle Stream. I think it may end up being Oh, goodness.
Oh, look at those debuffs on Aikyo as well. The brutal healing absorb of the necrotic bolts there as they are free casting. They are out of interrupts. Those are just going to keep landing on him. Somehow he's staying alive there. Gets back to his Fell Devastation.
All right, this is fine.
But they have very
Oh,
little in the tank
Mick.
left as the Manifestation of Pride spawns. Mick goes down to it. It
he
looks
get
like a
meleeed?
Spiteful Shade may have connected with him. And Mode now under a lot of pressure as well. They are low on mana, they are low on health, and they are high on Pride HP. It's going to be an ice block from Krona to attempt to survive here for a little while, but one of those necrotic bolts is still casting away at them here. They are able to get through, though, most of the mobs here. That's going to be another Spiteful Shade, though, that they have to manage at the same time as this Pride. So they're going to do a little bit of kiting in the middle of this pull. And I think there's definitely a chance that this Pride is not supposed to happen at this time. Maybe it is, but whew, this is rough.
Yeah, well, this is really good for Obey Alliance as they're trying to. Now they are back onto the Manifestation of Pride, the one that Gargoyle, the 40% one that Gargoyle just
is still working
well.
on. Yeah, both teams are at the same point in time now. Somehow, Obey Alliance have. They're still about half of a Pride behind here, but
and 10
this
seconds.
is really, really close. Yeah, 10 seconds of depth differential. Both teams with deaths already plenty on the board, but the difference there is that 10 extra seconds. Gargoyle, though, have to finish off this Bone Mender, which Obey Alliance are not going to have to do. They are a little bit ahead on count now because of, I assume, that those pulls that Obey Alliance instead opted to skip. So by the time they're finished with that and then finished with the Spiteful Shade, Obey Alliance is in basically the same position as them here. 2% behind, but they are going to be able to make their Shroud happen right around the same time as Gargoyle. So this is still very much anybody's game. It's going to come down to who executes these massive, massive pulls and then these 3 difficult bosses at the end of the dungeon better. As IQ for Gargoyle is going to grab these mobs and start setting up for this massive pull. All eyes now on Maysign and both rogues, actually, as this is a huge rogue moment. How much damage they're able to deploy with that combination of the weapons that are left lying around in this dungeon and the 100% crit with their Master Assassin. It's going to be Vanishes used by both rogues to get another 4 seconds of 100% crit. Great job, it looks like, by Gargoyle. They're going to spawn their Pride, kite these shades with the use of that Ring of Peace. Obey Alliance, though, also has done a very good job of doing that. They don't have the Ring of Peace, but they do have the Frost Nova. And the Frost Nova is going to be enough to do a similar job as they are very carefully positioning to not AoE and break that Frost Nova.
Yeah, very important. You do see both rogues eclipsing 200k DPS, really calling for rogue nerfs here.
IQ, he's at 2% health, but he's alive somehow.
He doesn't have Last Resort. Is he getting meleeed by the Okay, so interestingly enough, some of the things with Spiteful that's important to note. Like if you meld off the Spiteful, if you vanish off the Spiteful, if you use any of those effects on it, it can actually retarget your tank, and typically it will end up retargeting your tank. So it's actually a really scary thing for your tank if they don't know that you're going to be melding, vanishing, using invisibility effects to be able to drop combat. Gargoyle and Obey Alliance, virtually similar points in the dungeon, but Obey Alliance is Slingshot ahead now, Dratnos. They're about 5 to 10% ahead on a Marth.
Yes, but we do have to remember those 10 extra seconds at the end of the dungeon. I think, much like that Sanguine Depths, we have 2 teams right now that are at the exact same point in time here. There's no way to tell who is ahead here. It's all going to come down. I would say the most likely thing is going to be that big Necropolis trash pull. I think that is a hugely volatile pull. A lot can go wrong there, and if it goes very wrong for one team, I think they're in a lot of trouble. Otherwise, it'll come down to just who can do it more cleanly, and then, of course, how those last 2 bosses go. We've seen problems for teams on some of those bosses, landing the hooks on Stitch Flesh, skipping the Pride correctly, and then killing it when you intend to kill it. All of those things are not easy to do every single time, but we will see these 2 teams try to do it, and whichever one does a better job at it is going to be the winner of this game, I think.
Yep. So now Amarth is starting to dip below 20% HP for both sides. They're going to just use kicks on the mages and just going to continue to cleave off the boss. Interestingly enough, Does Gargoyle Stream has a Shackle and a Paralysis on their 2 mages. Obey Alliance just has a Shackle on theirs. Whenever that Harvest cast does go off on Amarth, if the ads are CC'd, then it won't wipe you. If the ads are not, if they don't have a CC effect on them, then they will. The Harvest can apply the debuff to you, and it will probably end up wiping you. Because that debuff is pretty nasty. So Obey Alliance ends up killing Amarth. Gargoyle Stream kills it within 2 seconds. So there is a 10 seconds of death differential, but there's a lot of ways that you can make up 10 seconds especially in this Necropolis, like Dratnos said a second ago.
Is Gargoyle having trouble coordinating who's getting on which period? It looked like they were maybe having a little bit of each person going for the same one moment there. They are all able to catch their flight here, as they will be all making their way up into this Necropolis area, and I think that we are going to see massive pulls likely to come out from both teams here, as there's both teams really, really, really close here. Skylark on the side of Obey Alliance is going to be the first person to get in combat, tossing some glaives around, pulling a bunch of enemies, Infernal striking in and immediately popping that Metamorphosis. Meanwhile, IQ on the side of Gargoyle, also doing the same thing, but 40 goes down on the side of Obey Alliance. That is not good. It's not catastrophic. Most of the damage comes from the Rogue here. The Rogue plus the weapon. But on the side of Gargoyle, they're having a much tougher time grouping everything together. Oh, Gargoyle drops so low, is going to be able to survive. Mode also really low on health.
He dies!
Oh, no! So Obey Alliance also have a dead gamer here.
IQ may die here. Oh no, this is so bad.
Skylark also under so much pressure. IQ doesn't have his cheat though. Skylark does have, I think, cheat available. Oh, it's been used, as has his Darkness Legendary. His Darkness Legendary, which is using his proc here. Mode dies for Gargoyle. That's going to lead to IQ dying as well. But Obey Alliance aren't out of the woods yet either. Shape going down.
Skylark died.
Hollow is going to meld out here, and they are also going to have to reset much of this pull. So both teams ending up having difficulties here. Looks like Gargoyle actually maybe... Oh no, Tettles, they're being spawn camped by the Manifestation of Pride. Oh no. He got dropped off.
Something is happening. Something is happening, and it's not good.
So here's what happened for Gargoyle, is they did a better job of dealing more damage and killing more trash. Because they got above that 80% threshold, they spawned a Manifestation of Pride. Obey Alliance wiped in a more costly way, but did not get that Manifestation of Pride to spawn, because of that, they weren't spawn camped by it. So you can see Gargoyle have actually, they're having to wait until that Manifestation walks back over to where it initially spawned, which it now has done, and they will now be able to get up there and start their pull again. And this has given Obey Alliance a huge window of opportunity, not just now in terms of overtaking on that death counter, but they are going to be able to kill off this trash that Gargoyle had killed, but they hadn't. So, wow, I mean, this pull was so brutal for both sides. So much went wrong, but we'll see which team is able to recover better here. Even though that went much worse with the spawn camping for Gargoyle Pride, they're still ahead in count here, and they are working on that Pride. They've done quite a bit of damage to it. They will be able to kill it somewhat soon, and then they'll probably be able to take it into that next trash bowl. Of course, you do have to kill all of the trash in the room before you can start the mini-boss gauntlet, so that is an important thing to keep in mind here. Obey Alliance are already working on this trash in the left corner. They are going to be grabbing the right corner trash that Gargoyle has already killed, while Gargoyle working on that left corner trash.
40 getting harassed by a spiteful
cast.
shade.
We have cast going off on the side of Gargoyle. That is something you want to avoid happening. Somehow they are able to heal through it, but that is brutal. They have a mob that is just free casting from outside there. One of those collectors. They're in some trouble, it looks like, as the Gore Splatter casts. Okay, they are able to interrupt at that time. Wow, this has been a very tricky thing that they are somehow able to handle. Both teams now at pretty much exactly the same mob count. Obey Alliance working on their Pride, whereas Gargoyle have that prideful buff for this section. But it actually looks like there's a Kyrian Stitchwork that they were still unable to have killed so far. So they need to kill this before they can start the gauntlet. There's a Collector and a Stitchwork that they need to take care of. Well, on the side of Obey Alliance, there is still a Flesh Crafter and
an
Abomination
also
over
have the
there.
Stitchwork pack. I think they have the Stitchwork pack too. I think that they're actually like one full trash pack behind
Yes,
on the
you
side
are.
of Obey Alliance.
Right, you are. They are going to be pulling both at the same time, though. So if they're able to execute this well, they should be pretty much caught up with where Gargoyle
This is scary.
Obey Alliance are still in their Pride buff, whereas it has expired for Gargoyle. So that is an important thing that might allow them to do this pull.
Yeah, this is an incredibly scary pull, but they do have the Flesh Crafter here, which will do the Cleaver, which can be used to take down stuff like the Creation, like the Stitchwork. Both of those high health targets are really good focuses of the Flesh Crafter Cleaver. And since, like you said, they have their Pride buff, they're actually able to deal with this pack pretty quickly. And now Obey Alliance and Gargoyle Stream are neck and neck again, Dratnos.
Yeah, somehow two wrongs have canceled out here and have made a right for these teams as they are getting underway with this Assistant, the first of 3 gauntlet packs that will be spawning here. 15 seconds of death differential between these teams. It looks like slightly more than 15 seconds ahead for Gargoyle. So when you factor that in, it is basically neck and neck here as both teams getting started on these assistants. Very important that their cleavers land on each other. Ideally, you want to try and kill them at the same time, not just for efficiency, but to make sure there's always a good target for any of those cleavers. So making sure your damage is divided nice and efficiently is an important part of this pull. Gargoyle almost finished with it. We'll maybe be able. I'll count once the second assistant dies. So there it is at
right,
528 on their boss tree split. Yeah,
counting.
You go ahead and talk for a bit,
keep
and then I'll
talking.
come back and report in.
Now Obey Alliance is sitting here dealing with these assistants. Gargoyle is going to be kiting out the Spiteful Shades. Gorgrine has been spawned by Mr. Stitchwork himself, and he does a Tenderize and a Mutilate cast, while he also does a Frontal. The Tenderize and the Mutilate are pretty dangerous to the tank. And Dratnus, can you give us your findings on the time,
Yes,
sir?
500 milliseconds, 1/2 of 1 second is what separates these two teams based on our last reading, our last scientific reading of their progression in this dungeon. That 15.5 seconds was the difference between their kill times on the last assistant here. And so, yeah, this is anybody's game at this point. It is going to come down to really these last two boss fights. And of course, the management of this gauntlet. Even though the gauntlet is pretty easy relative to the rest of the dungeon because they're not allowed to pull extra stuff on it, it is by no means easy to do it as quickly as possible, right? And in a game where there's half a second separating these two teams, it is going to be the minor optimizations on these little trash pulls that'll make the difference if the bosses are done equally well.
Mm-hmm. So now Obey Alliance is starting to kite out Gorgrind a little bit. You do see Skylark is trying to run away, running immediately out of his darkness and his barrier. He does not need those because the most important thing is for him to get a reset on the Tenderize, which increases his physical damage taken. But since he is kiting, that's actually really bad for time efficiency. That is good for his survivability, but that's really bad for time efficiency. It's an incredibly scary thing to have to deal with. But this is really good for Gargoyle if you're a Gargoyle fan. Now they're on the Rot Spew, trying to DPS him, making sure he does the exact same thing as Gorgrind. He just does it. Well, I guess he has a Spew Disease, but he does the Mutilate and the Tenderize cast, which are the big tank, the tank abilities that are really scary. Now Gargoyle stream has procced their 100% Pride. They will be getting that before the third boss. Trying to phase that boss really quickly. Earlier we saw Gargoyle have some issues with the hooks. I would like to see them shore up those issues. And I actually don't really expect they're going to have problems with that again in this run.
Yeah, you want to aim the hook directly at the boss. Whenever you do that, it will hook the boss down, but if you miss, it will not do anything. So they're going to try their best to line that up. It's very difficult, actually, when you're fighting the Pride because you have all these other positioning restraints, and the hook will hook the Pride if it connects with the Pride instead. So you really want to make sure that you're tanking the Pride in a careful position, as they do get their Pride buff perfectly timed with when the boss gets yoinked down. They're going to try and do as much damage as possible to this boss with Fortified active rather than Tyrannical. They are going to just try and explode this thing as, on the side of Obey Alliance, disaster has struck as they tried to skip the Pride, but were unable to do so, so they are going to just pull it in. They were planning to save this Pride until after this boss so that they could have it for the last boss, whereas Gargoyle have combined the Pride and the Bloodlust for this boss. Hollow goes down for Obey Alliance, though, and this is catastrophic for Obey Alliance now. They are going to get that battle res. They're going to use their Bloodlust here to try and help kill this boss with the Pride, but the combination of the boss being active and the Pride being active in an unplanned way is going to be really, really brutal for them. Gargoyle are making their way up now to the last boss. They're going to pull this last boss without the benefit of Bloodlust, without the benefit of Pride, but Obey Alliance isn't going to have those either because they were forced to use their Bloodlust and they already killed their Pride accidentally here. So Gargoyle is substantially ahead here. They should be able to take this if they can kill this boss cleanly. There are now only 10 seconds death differential as well separating the teams.
Yeah, I mean, basically Obey Alliance is hoping that Gargoyle has some deaths here. Gargoyle does have battle reses, but unfortunately they're not running a DK, so they only have access to engineering as their source of battle resing right here. So now they're getting the Dark Exile cast. It does go into Maystein. You see Mo tries to grip him out of those hands a little bit late on that grip. Unfortunately for does Gargoyle stream. And now Thor is continuing to be DPS. Obey Alliance does end up downing the third boss, but I think it may be too little too late unless Gargoyle has an absolutely massive throw.
Yeah, Obey Alliance got the worst of both worlds with their Pride situation there, as they were forced to end up using the Lust and didn't even get to bring this Pride onto the last boss. So they are in a tough spot here. They are going to do their best with all their damage cooldowns. And again, remember, Obey Alliance does have 10 extra seconds after Gargoyle is able to kill this boss, and they are pumping this boss. Look at the damage that they are putting out here. Shape on that mage is just combusting for so much damage. Looks like they might have. Are they going to be able to? Here's that Dark Exile. They are going to Shadow Meld it. It's gonna. Is it? Yeah. Okay. So they've avoided the Dark Exile going off here, so they're going to have full damage uptime.
It'll
Here
recast.
comes the next Gargoyle, or the next Dark Exile. They're going to again meld. It comes off once again. And this time it does land. Okay, so they are going to have it happen eventually. They're unable to defer it indefinitely until such time as it goes on an ice block, which is unfortunate for Obey Alliance. That would have really helped them as they tried to catch up here. Meanwhile, Gargoyle pumping away at this boss. They are ahead by 30% on the boss's HP as the boss is getting so low here. It's running out of options here for Obey Alliance.
Yeah, I mean, it was really good job of trying to meld it off. Their best case scenario is that it would have gone on one of the mages. The mages can actually block off the Dark Exile and not be picked up by it at all. That would have been the best case scenario. But for Gargoyle, the boss is starting to dip lower and lower. They have all 3 of their DPS up on the platform. They take down Nalthor and take and even back up the series 1-1.
There it is, this Gargoyle stream taking down the boss first on that one, taking the victory as well, and Necrotic Wake I don't think was going the way that any of us thought on that one, Dranos.
Wow, that was, I mean, that was one of the ways that Necrotic Wake goes down. That's how Necrotic Wake often looks in my
True.
groups, but we've seen a lot of different ways for this dungeon to look. Most of those wipes that happen are because they are just such ambitious pulls. That's a lot of how this kind of thing goes down, and I mean, yeah, it's just tough. It's just tough when that starts to happen. Both teams just had so much going on for them. As we are joined here by Bert on the cast. That's
Bert,
Tails' cat.
What did you think about that one, Bert? Tails doing a Bert check.
I don't know where he is.
Listen, he's already here.
What do you mean? He's
Probably
right here.
somewhere else.
He's
Tettles.
probably napping.
Yeah, he's on
obviously
camera.
napping.
This is a live picture, Tettles.
Yes, my cat.
Where do you think your camera went? we already have our cameras.
Hey, that's not Tattles but closer. That's Tattles but closer.
All right, so yeah,
classic.
on that one, I think that at this point, you just take all of the issues that you saw in that Necrotic Wake, you hopefully throw them out the window and take it straight into the Mist of Tyrannus Scythe. We've seen Gargoyle actually play Mist of Tyrannus Scythe on the weekend. They looked really good in their match on Mists versus PI me. But unfortunately, as you can see sometimes, Obey Alliance, I feel like their innovation in the Mist of Tyrannus Scythe was one that caught a lot of teams off guard. We haven't seen how they played Mist this weekend. So the ball is definitely in their court for them to have an exceptional performance in Mist. I think that they can absolutely do it, but they need to be able to keep cool, keep calm, keep collected, and not be tilted after that interesting Necrotic Wake.
Yeah, interesting is one way of putting it. And I think that, you know, in a lot of our experiences that we've had in the past, Dranos, we've talked to teams about whether they're watching their opponents to see if they're ahead, behind, and a lot of times we've heard that they just check right after the fact or something, or they'll go rewind really quickly because they're so focused on the game. So hopefully, you know, if there is any of that tilt from either of the teams, they can kind of just watch, rewind, and say, oh, well, they had some of those problems too. It's okay now.
Yeah, it's such a rough spot to be in because you kind of kick yourself after the fact as well. You just look at it and you're like, man, if we had just pulled this in half as fast in that room, if we hadn't gone for those big pulls, we would have easily won, right? Because so much went wrong for the other team. But you can't get in that mindset. That's not a champion's mindset. You want to be thinking about how are we going to beat the best possible run the other team could come up with, not how do we beat their actual run when you're doing like post-game analysis. So I think both teams have a lot of stuff that they can look to improve in that dungeon. It's a really tough dungeon. It is, I think, the dungeon that is most likely to look like that run just did, because there are just so many massive pulls, and there's so many ways that they can go wrong.
Yeah, we've seen a number of times as well, Tettles, of just that Necropolis pull going wrong. I'm not sure if it's just not enough damage when they need to, or are they just missing resources or something like that? What's actually been causing it? Because I think we've seen 3 teams now having wipes up in Necropolis so far.
I think it comes to like a nerf of the Kyrian armaments and like them being target capped. So in previous weekends, or like the last MDI weekend, we saw the pack being overkilled even by just a little bit. So it wasn't overkilled by a lot. And now they're doing a little bit different of a strategy. The mobs are taking a little bit longer to be grouped. And then if they're being grouped poorly, it's hard for the melee DPS to get out effective damage. And we see the wipes coming in on those packs whenever the trash pack is like 5, 10, 15%. Because, like, honestly, that pack is not sustainable for the tank for very long, right? You have Stitchworks in that pack. You have multiple Stitchworks in that pack, as a matter of fact. And they're stacking up the Tenderize. They're hitting the tank with the Mutilate. And it's not the hardest thing imaginable, as long as the pack dies really quickly. But the issue is that the pack is just like living at 15% HP, and that's like 20 mobs beating down on your tank. Once your tank goes down, the rest of the pack just dies. Or like you have like one melee die to a Spiteful randomly, or accidentally rip thread on one just kind of stray mob, and it's like from there, then the pull is like almost over. You are going to wipe at 15%, and then occasionally you get spawn camped by a Pride, which is the worst.
That's never fun.
That was terrible.
Yeah, Prides really hate to let go. They really do. They really hate to reset and everything like that. Sometimes they just love to stick around. But let's see how Mr. Tyrannosai is going to be rolling for us as well. And Drados, at the beginning of the series, you were talking about it. More Sanguine management is going to be key for whoever is going to be taking this series.
Yeah, Mist has a couple of important Sanguine moments. Also just some very intense DPS check moments. For instance, that first boss, getting that thing killed within its first damage taken increase versus something like we saw happen earlier where you have the shield come up, the fear come out right as the damage is going up. That can be really, really, really costly thing if it happens. So both teams are going to be trying to make use of that damage buff with the mind control to get as much done as possible on that first boss. And they really want to minimize the amount of total Sanguine healing that happens in this dungeon. It's unlikely that Sanguine healing is going to cause a wipe in the way that it does in Sanguine Depths, where like a really important mob survives for long enough to kill you. It's more likely that just you're going to lose 15 or 30 seconds, and those 15 or 30 seconds can easily make the difference in a match as close as this one.
Almost definitely. I mean, we saw it just in our previous series as well, having the Droman villager getting healed as they were standing in Sanguine and channeling and everything like that, right, Tettles? Yeah.
Oh, dude, the Tyrannian villagers at the very beginning. Okay, so, like, we've seen two different openers for this dungeon. We know Gargoyle does double Tyrannian villager. I'll be interested to see what Obey Alliance does, but double Tyrannian villager on Sanguine is just a good way to accidentally have mobs, generally those Spike Claws that have like probably like 50% of the HP of the Tyrannian villager. If they die beneath the mobs, it's impossible to move them. They'll end up channeling that Overgrowth cast. They'll end up channeling, I don't know what it is. It's like a Disorient. I don't know the name of it, though. They'll channel that Disorient cast, and they're impossible to move because they can't be displaced. It's really, really rough to be able to deal with. However, it is tyrannical, so if you have good Rings of Peace, if you have good Shining Forces, Sigil of Chains, also very useful. If you have perfect management of your Sanguine and your Sanguine pool drops, then it looks excellently done, and it's really fast. However, if you don't, then it's going to cost you, like, I mean, we saw it from PI, and it cost them like 30 or 45 seconds.
Yeah, and every little bit of difference is going to be a huge deal, because, I mean, even up to before everything went terribly, terribly wrong in Sanguine Depths, it was still looking to be a close game before it was absolutely not. And then Necrotic Wake's getting closer, it continues to look like does Gargoyle Stream Dranos has been developing and continuing to improve to be that team that we're wanting to watch, to be the up-and-comers and everything. And it's going to be put to the test right now as Mr. Tyrannosai gets underway between DGS and Obey Alliance.
Yeah, not only are we going to have Sanguine deal with that grievous combination as well, with both Prideful and with the Tyrannical bosses, really all four of the affixes going on in this dungeon are going to test these two teams, and whichever emerges the victor, it's going to be a worthy one after they're able to win this map.
I think there's definitely something to be said about being able to like overcome problems in dungeons. Not every run is going to be the most clean one, and being able to adapt and overcome the problems of Necrotic Wake, reset your mental state a little bit, is really important. Both of these teams, like, does Gargoyle Stream is not the most veteran team. Obey Alliance is objectively the more veteran of teams, but it'll be interesting to see how the teams do in terms of resetting their mental state. Obey Alliance is actually going for a single Tyrannian villager here, which I don't think is a really bad call. The double Tyrannian villager that Gargoyle Stream is doing is incredibly dangerous, and they need to make sure to have good Sanguine management for it. They're doing a good job of utilizing things such as the displacement of Typhoon. You saw a really good Sigil of Chains early, where on Obey Alliance they only have one Tyrannian villager. It's a lot easier to be able to deal with. The Tyrannian villager, of course, dies at 20% HP, so you see Obey Alliance get theirs dead. I would say orders of magnitude ahead of Does Gargoyle Stream, right now, does Gargoyle Stream's damage is going to kind of screech to a halt as they have 2 villagers channeling that overgrowth onto people. They've blown through, you see all of their shadow melds, which is the only way to cancel that overgrowth onto targets. So now they're going to start getting stunned, but they are able to down those villagers in great time. And now Obey Alliance and Does Gargoyle Stream are making their way to the rest of the dungeon, with Gargoyle Stream having about a 5% differential in terms of enemy forces count, which will come back into play later on in the instance, most notably in the maze whenever you're getting your, I think it's 60% prideful.
Yeah, the 5% can easily make a difference later. For now, though, it does lead to Gargoyle. The fact they were able to get that pull done so much more quickly, they are substantially ahead in terms of where they are in the dungeon. They've already gotten started here on this big pull, and they've wasted no time in pulling the rest of the trash into these 2 big mobs. This is going to be something they have to be really careful of, as they are very much synchronized on their thrashings that start at 50% HP. Somehow they are able to stay alive here, but look at those Grievous stacks as well, starting to tick on the whole group.
Yeah, Shape, I think, who dropped to 5% HP and got hit with like a massive heal to be able to top himself. Maybe that was a health potion as well. You do see on both sides there's Soul Cleavers that are going to be CC'd. They will use those later on to help them phase Droman and Ingram Malok just a little bit later on into the fight. MCing them, what is the talent? Dominant Mind. Mind controlling them with the Dominant Mind talent allows the priest to take them as a pet, so they're able to actually continue to cast while having the mob mind controlled. Obey Alliance pulling this manifestation of pride straight into Droman and Ingram Malok. We saw them pull the pride into Droman and Ingram Malok last weekend, but notably they pulled it in whenever it was only 20%.
He gets hit by one of the prideful stuns. They are going to instantly battle res him, but that is going to set them way far behind here, as they are low on mana, and the manifestation of pride is ramping up, and Grievous is on everybody. Hollow at 1% HP, barely able to survive there. 40 also dropping low. They're able to kill the pride. That damage, healing, and mana buff should be enough to save them here, but wow, that was so close to a disaster for Obey Alliance. Gargoyle, on the other hand, having a much cleaner look at this boss, a little bit less ambitious with when they chose to pull the pride into boss as well.
Yeah, I don't know. It was a really good move, and I do think it was just a little bit ambitious, because obviously it was a good move because they were still able to pull it off, even with what I would identify as the worst case scenario. Basically, Sans away, like their healer dying. No, dude, how did Chompy die?
Oh no, this is so bad for them because they don't have access to that battle res. The Droman is still taking damage here. They won't have a battle res for this entire fight, though, so they are just going to have to deal with this with 4 people.
Chompy is like all the boss damage, too, man.
Yeah, that Convoke the Spirits, even if you don't hit the full moons, it does so much damage. On single target, 40 is going to go down as well. There is no hope for Obey Alliance here. The best they can do is try and meld this boss off. As you can see, Hollow getting in position to try and land that meld and follow that up with the mass res once they drop boss combat.
They lost Bloodlust. They lost their prideful buff. Sure, they still have the Soul Cleaver. I don't think they're able to one-phase Ingram Malok anymore. I think they're going to have to play this boss normally.
I mean, yes, certainly they are not going to be able to one-phase it. They're going to be down by so much damage here. They will still have that mind control available, I think. So that will be 1 point in their favor, but they are going to be down. They're going to be doing somewhere in the range of half as much damage, half to like 70% as much damage as they would be doing with the Pride and with the Lust. So that is a really, really brutal turn of events there. One good news point for them is they didn't end up using Celestial Alignment or Convoke the Spirits, so they will have access to those cooldowns for the burn phase, but there's just no way they're going to be able to one-phase this. Teams that have one-phased it have had the stars align, as it were, and have everything go right for them, whereas Obey Alliance just doesn't have that possible without the Lust and the Pride.
Trentno's making memes again. All right, now does Gargoyle stream here. They turned their 2 into a 6-pack. This is... now
we got some Sanguine healing.
Yeah, moderate Sanguine healing. Not enough to be concerned about, but if you didn't know what was happening on the other side, this was like... I would say that was a 15-second time loss just right there just because the defender was channeling in the Sanguine.
Clearly nothing as catastrophic as what has happened on the side of Obey Alliance, who are they are going to have to deal with this boss really, really slowly. And actually, it is a somewhat dangerous boss as well. On Tyrannical plus 18, when you aren't one-phasing it, when you start getting to those later parts of Ingram Malok's cast sequence, with the fears, with that big pulsing damage once he gets to his Embrace Darkness cast, that is really, 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 really nasty. They are going to Dragon's Breath that Soul Cleaver and Mind Control it right now, Meanwhile, Gargoyle is spawning their 40% Pride. They're going to quickly pop the next section of the maze so that they can bring it into their very next pull. There goes the first damage phase for Obey Alliance. Let's see how low they're able to get Ingram Malik to. Really any number sub 40%, I'd say, with their Celestial alignment, and they should be able to take it the rest of the way on the next damage phase. But yeah, there's no way they are coming close to one-phasing this thing.
Yeah. I mean, so the first weekend of MDI, we saw a team try to kill the boss from 24%. That was not doable. That was like, they were really just not having it. So I think that Droman has to be the target here. I don't think you can. I unfortunately don't think you can cleave off of Ingram Malik. At this point, if you're Obey Alliance, you're kind of hoping Gargoyle has like a massive error. They would have to. They would have to have a full wipe. I think at this point, like I don't even know where they could have a time loss as big as what Obey Alliance had.
Yeah, well, what happened for Obey Alliance is, I mean, one of the largest amounts of time you could lose to a single thing going wrong. Is to something like that. You've lost a Pride, you've lost a Bloodlust, you've lost a Battle Res, and you've lost all the time that you spent dumping damage into stuff that ended up fully healing, especially something as high HP as a boss. Gargoyle, you can see here, already at 55% trash count, while Obey Alliance still just at that 20% threshold. Gargoyle will be spawning their 60% Pride off of this Gorge Gullet mini-boss here. That frog loves to leap around, jump around, have some fun.
Jump up and get down.
Also on the agenda here. They're going to do their best to kill this thing and then quickly again pop through the next mist barrier so that they can spawn the Pride and fight it with some extra trash. There they go, popping open that door as Obey Alliance will finally be able to take down the very first boss of the dungeon here, but it is going to be in twice the time that it took Gargoyle to achieve the same time.
Yep. Now you do see this manifestation of Pride being pulled straight into the trash pack. This is actually really good efficiency of cleave. The only thing that you need to make sure is that you get kicks on the tender, which doesn't look like there are any tenders in this pull. So this is actually a pretty easy pack. There is the Stinger, which will put that circle on targets.
And there's the Sanguine that drops, which they are doing a good job of moving from. These mobs can be tricky with Sanguine because they do like to stand still and channel that flurry. But good movement by Gargoyle, good use of stuff like Ring of Peace. They're able to, in mode with the Life Grip as well, instantly get into the next room. That is massively speedy coming out from them. Yeah, they are doing a great job of zooming through this maze as Obey Alliance just getting started in the very start of this maze, but Gargoyle will be just about done with this maze here. So an entire maze separating these teams.
I have a question. Do you think that both of these teams next weekend will adopt the strategy that we actually saw put forth by P2's Angels, where they're able to chi burst through the wall and pull the trash pack?
My suspicion is that by tomorrow, every team that goes into Mr. Tyrannicide will be doing that. Well, one thing that Obey Alliance is they don't have a monk, so they actually
they would need to rework their strategy.
Yeah, they would need to do much more reworking. But I think every team that already had a Windwalker in here will find a way to make that adjustment because it seems like such an open and shut case of saving 30 seconds to a minute.
Chompy is their monk player. Is like notable.
Right, he's their monk and their moonkin and their rogue. He is their versatile multi-classer, which puts him in a rough spot when you want multiple of his multi-classes.
You know, that guy is actually an insane player. That guy can play everything. He tanked dungeons for me on beta.
All right, very cool name drop titles. We get it. You know,
I hate you. All right, moving on. I hate Dratus so much. Does Gargoyle stream pulling on Mistcaller at 60%, getting the second mirror image phase here in just a moment.
Yeah, Mistcaller, they're 56% and falling quickly. Obey Alliance trying to speed up here, but they still have 2 full Prides in this maze ahead of them before they will even get to Mistcaller. There's a huge amount of trash to deal with in this maze, especially with the pathing that we have here. I think it's the 7 full rooms, which is a lot of time, as you can see. They are going to be able to open up their next door, while Gargoyle making their way to that 40% threshold, where they will start the second guessing game of the fight. Does spawn at 90, 40, and 10% health. Theoretically, if you get the boss into a good cast sequence, especially on Fortified, it might be possible to destroy Mistcaller from 10 to 0 prior to that cast going off. But I think that with Tyrannical active, it is much more risk than reward. And I think that also with the teams, with the compositions they're running, you'd really have to save every possible cooldown for an attempt at that.
Mr. Mode was getting run down by the bots there. That was a very scary moment.
Mistcaller now casting that very last guessing game of the fight. Once they resolve this phase, they will be done with that boss, I think, quite a while before Obey Alliance even gets to pulling it. So Gargoyle, yeah, sitting on something like a 4-minute advantage here, which 4 minutes is a lot, Tunnels. That is a lot, especially in a dungeon as short as Mists of Tierna's Scythe, because as soon as they're done here, they just have one trash pull, and then they're going right into boss, and then they'll pull some trash right at the very end. So they're going to be zooming from here. As that boss goes down, they'll be waiting for this wall to come down.
They actually leave a mob parad in the back of the room that they pull in like at the very end. So their difference in strategy in the beginning, that 5% difference on their opener, is again coming back to just be a little bit different in their ender as well, where it allows them to get more count by not having to pull those larvae right there at the very end. It allows them to get 100% of their count by leaving a mob parad. Typically, I think it ends up being a Gorger, not an Acid Gullet, but I'm not 100% sure. They'll leave it like parad off to the side.
Maystein going to sneak around here in that stealth, gets himself in good position here to just turret in that Moonkin form, as they will be pulling a lot of mobs here all at the same time, focusing damage here carefully, because of course with Sanguine active, they do need to be careful, although the larvae don't drop Sanguine, so they don't actually have to worry too much about that.
Maystein, interestingly enough, is standing here, and he hibernated the Reavers to make sure that they didn't patrol into them. I was sitting there, I was like, why is this? I didn't understand like what the full purpose of standing over here was, but that makes a lot of sense. Right, because those Reavers...
It's the Tiernan Villager. This is where it comes back. So the count that you got from the Tiernan Villager means you don't have to deal with these Reavers in this pull. And this pull, a lot of the times when we have seen this pull go wrong, it's been because of those Reavers, those bees. When they come in, they start stinging you. Really important to either handle them effectively, or Gargoyle's decided, you know what, it's actually better to deal with a Tiernan Villager. As annoying and as slow as those mobs can be, let's just deal with one of those, and then we can hibernate the bees there. That's great adjustment from Gargoyle.
I actually think that Gargoyle, with what we saw today earlier from P2's Angels, is going to have to rework their strategy, because I think Chi bursting the pack through the wall messes up the...
No, it doesn't mess up your count, because it's from the next room you'd go to anyways.
But they have the Pride in the pack already, is the problem.
Okay, so yeah, if they want to adjust their Pride timing so that that's possible, you're right, that might be something. If they want to adopt that, they'd have to change. That may be too much to change in a single day, though, for going into tomorrow. As they get into the last boss here, Tredova, they have some mobs crowd controlled with Ring of Peace, and they will be CCing one mob and letting the rest come in and damage them down. Maystein's going to run to the far side of Tredova here to make sure that his Convoke only targets Tredova. Very important thing to do as the Moonkin.
He also was standing near enough to the ads to where he could get his Imperial Ordnance orbs off of those ads. He was making sure that he didn't outrange them whenever they procced off of it, because otherwise that would have been tragic. That's actually a pretty big move for him to be able to get his double on use off, because double on use is really hard to play in these dungeons, especially since you have to like delay your CDs by 20 seconds and whatnot. So this is really good play by somebody who's not a Moonkin main. This guy's a Feral main. And so them picking him up for this weekend, he's actually done a lot of really good things for them, being able to flex into that Rogue, being able to flex into that DK, playing Moonkin whenever they need him to as well. Now you actually see that Gorger that was parried, or the Acid Gullet, I guess, that was parried off to the side, now making its way in. Tredova sitting at a nice 40% HP. They do Frost Nova that Acid Gullet. They're not ready for it yet. However, they will be pulling it in whenever they deem the time is right.
Yeah, this has been such an impressive run from Gargoyle. 0 deaths in Mists of Tierna's Scythe. 0 things really going wrong for them. With their route being a little unconventional, things have really paid off for them this time. Once Shadova goes down, I mean, Obey Alliance has just had so much cascade from that very first thing that went wrong on that first boss that they've never really been able to catch up here in this game. This has been a brutal end for Obey Alliance, but Gargoyle, wow, they are looking so good. They are going to pull in that Acid Gullet now. Once it goes down, that'll be their 100% trash count. They want to make sure that they don't kill it before they kill the last boss, because they do not want to have to deal with the Pride during this boss. So the entire theory here, leaving that one mob out CC'd, is that we're going to kill it after or as the boss dies, and then get that last Pride, but we don't need to kill it because the timer will have stopped. Everything will be over. 5% left on Tredova and about 50% left on this Gullet. That's all that separates Gargoyle now from staying alive into Sunday of this tournament.
Yep. And now you do see the Convoke coming out. Big Moon! Capping off that 100%. And the 3rd seed takes down the 4th seed as Gargoyle takes the win.
That's right. Gargoyle is going to be taking that victory, and they are going to be moving on throughout the bracket, moving on to tomorrow. So the new guard lives to continue fighting, and so far they've been the only one. In fact, they will be the only one as well, because our next matchup to see who's going to stay in for the top 4 for tomorrow is going to be between Golden Guardians and PI Me. So incredibly impressive performance here by Des Gargoyle's stream. Really going to show how much this team has progressed in such a very short amount of time, and the power of Disc Stonks.
Yeah, Disc Stonks definitely propelling